there. And just before I say anything about Maxwell, in case there's any eagle-eyed people out there who spot that I'm called Tina Hoffmann.
Oh,
no
yes.
relation to Maxwell, honestly.
She's my sister. She made sure that she would not want to be.
I'm pretty much of a Luddite when it comes to job titles such as gurus, evangelists, or champions. To all intents and purposes, I think these are just people who've got knowledge and experience that they generously share with the community. And I think this is what Maxwell is about, generously sharing his knowledge and experience he's gathered during his professional experience. So over to you, Maxwell.
Thank you very much. If I had started earlier, I would do my usual, pardon the grammar, I can't think of a good way to say it, but I do my usual kiss butt, how much I love Britain thing. All the past things, I've usually done this. It's true, the first time I saw England, I was on a boat and I saw the pink cliffs of Dover and I could see the planes coming overhead and it's true. And I realized, and I actually did weep. And then I took the train to the green countryside and emerged from Victoria Station and realized that this mother tongue ties us together. That's true, but I'm not going to do that this time. So I didn't want to do anything to...
You need to click on the presentation.
Oh, do I? Oh, I'm sorry. Click on the presentation button. Like, oh, you mean to throw it up on the screen, right? Make it full screen, like that? Super. Let's get it to come up. Here it comes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I hope I can see it too. That would be so nice. Now, I do need to try one other thing. I need to see if I can get over to... because I am going to go, okay, so I'm going to go from there back to where I went. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So this is about preparing your content for the next small thing. The reason I picked this title was it was cute, catchy, campy. I thought it would get people into the room. And then I figured later I would figure out what to say to go along with this. But since we're starting a few moments late, and I am going to make sure that we don't go over the 45-minute mark, I can share with you in a nutshell what my intention is, what I intend to do other than make you laugh. Okay, because I'm a baby boomer and I've been around a long time, I have this basket full of pearls of wisdom because I'm older than a few people in the room. However, I will acknowledge that most younger people know a lot that I don't know, and I can learn as much from them as they can learn from me. So this isn't going to be Daddy trying to tell you what he knows. However, I've been around enough that I've seen a lot of cyclical trends. I've seen a lot of predictions made that were wrong. This happens about every 10 or 15 years, there is a trend. And there's usually a tremendous amount of hoopla over the future, and you know how much things are going to change. Now, because I came of age during the 1960s, I'm marked for life with this future thing. Because any of you who've just gone on the internet and been curious about that decade, which was wonderful and colorful, and we had Twiggy and Julie Christie and the Carnaby Street and all of the wonderful fashions, and it really did change every 5 minutes. We were inundated with predictions about the future. And I'm not trying to be nostalgic about the 60s, but fashion, technology, man on the moon, changing politics, et cetera, there probably was almost more change in that decade than anything I can think of beyond World War II. And as much as things have changed in our recent decades, technologically things are changing with things like this, like the iPhone. Yes, it is a big change and it has changed our lives. We all kind of look the same. We're not really wearing clothes that are unrecognizable from 5 years ago or that type of thing. So I'm going to kind of bounce back to the 60s as a reference point, because that was for me, that was kind of the beginning of a lot of, what do I call bad predictions, or things that, people with good intentions and with what seemed to be credible evidence had a lot of reason to believe that certain things were going to happen. And then if you really paused at that time with common sense in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 90s, each one of the things I'm going to share, you really could have thought, oh, wait a minute. Is somebody really going to do this for half an hour to read the documentation? I don't think so. So I'm not at all trying to be dismissive of some of the new technologies and some of the new smaller screens. But what I'm trying to do is to put it in perspective as to how soon do we need to change our ways. How can we expect this to really change based on things that have recently happened and based on a lot of predictions that have not come true? So first of all, this is just the next big thing with my contact information. Oh, okay, and here's this incredible biography slide that anyone who has ever attended one of my webinars has seen. My biography is challenging because it is so long. There are so many decades to cover. For instance, I don't include the fact that I went to the California Maritime Academy to become a naval officer and study spherical trigonometry, that I didn't have enough money to go through college, so I actually got a hairdressing license, and I can't tell you what I learned in there. You know, working on people's heads is pretty amazing. If you ever want business intelligence, become a hairdresser. Seriously, even today, hasn't changed. So the relevant thing here, the purpose of this slide, of course, is more or less credibility. I'd say the only takeaway point here is that as a product evangelist or as somebody who is professionally here to promote solutions and promote whatever, I'm a little bit unusual in that I've spent about half my professional life as one of you, doing what you do in production, creating content, et cetera. I actually started out as an evangelist over 20 years ago, got burnt out, got sick of it, and went back into production. And then a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity came along to come and work for Adobe, work with FrameMaker, which I had worked with continuously for 25 years, so thus here I am. So the thing that's supposed to make me so wonderful and make you all connect with you emotionally is I stepped into this role with this amazing perspective of I am one of you. I truly am, and I'm not saying that to be cute or funny. Let me pause because this is being recorded. There are a few evangelists out there, not necessarily with my company, but there are a few evangelists out there that are used to things like laser and smoke and $100,000 product launches and stuff that really looks like a television production that are just not part of my world. I actually found a Facebook photograph of an evangelist having hair and makeup done before making an appearance at a product launch. Well, as you can tell, that doesn't cost a whole, all I really need is some powder. If that. Okay, so to the agenda. This is as formal as it gets. Now, those of you that saw Vikram Verma's presentation, which was quite good, you may recognize just a couple of slides. I'm not going to use very many of them, very few statistics. This is going to be almost all pictures, show and tell. In America, we had what was called Romper Room, little show for tots. It was kind of pre-Teletubbies, where there was a woman who did cute things like bouncing a ball. I'm going to do this at more of an adult level. It's going to be all pictures. The reason I'm doing this is not to consult your intelligence, although I could. The reason is because this is the very end of a conference with a lot of rich content. You all have your heads like buckets full of stuff. So I thought I would go to the most primal form of communications, which is primarily pictures. And actually, everything I share is true. So I'm going to do a little bit of review over recent trends in mobile devices, kind of my prediction of how far I think we can go with tiny screens in terms of what will really happen with them, and then there might possibly be a brief demo. I don't care if we do that or not. I'm not going to worry about it. So basically, to start out with, I always like to start with something personal that is relevant that will lead up to what we're going to do. And this is the Tempest in a Teacup. Okay, has anybody ever seen this before? I'd be shocked if you did. I have this has nothing to do with my childhood or anything like that. I hadn't seen this until I was in my 30s. What you're looking at is an American China pattern called Starburst. And this was the #1 bridal registry China in 1954. Okay, now think about America and bullets and nuclear weapons, all this stuff. So here in the 1950s, all these women dressed in white, ready to get on the aisle, can't wait to have like a nuclear logo on their China. I kid you not. Okay. Okay, why does this matter? Part of it is, what I'm leading up to here is a message about fear. By 1964, this was the most popular wedding China. And think about it, 64, the Beatles had just come to America in February, which truly was a massive turning point. I mean, it was just an overnight change in culture. Arthur Murray Dance Studios closed overnight. People stopped touching each other, et cetera. Wonderful things, I loved it. However, why did things go back to flowers? So this is kind of a quiz. Can anybody think of why around 1964 people would have been a little uncomfortable with nuclear stuff on their plates? If you think real hard, it's not too hard. Cuban Missile Crisis, bingo, 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 yes. If I was Simon Cowell, I would do some thing or whatever, pretend you're Susan Boyle. So anyway, yes, that was absolutely it. And it was kind of an unconscious thing. People weren't really thinking about it. But in my early childhood, which precedes the Beatles premiere, there were nuclear logos on top of everything. Car washes had these Sputnik things with the nuclear logo. Supermarkets, almost anything you could think of to be modern. There were liquor stores had these neon nuclear things. It's like, oh, we're so modern. Something that I failed to find on Google Images, I wish I had, was around that same time, just on the eve of the Cuban Missile Crisis, at one of the huge car shows, there was a car, you could look it up on Wikipedia, there was a car called the Nucleon. And it was this wonderful, if you've ever seen Thunderbird's XL100, there was that show with a marionation or whatever. There were these puppets in Britain, and they had this wonderful car that sort of had a bubble over them. Well, it looked like that, but it had this giant, what would have been a spare tire in front that was the nuclear reactor that was going to run your car. Now, there actually were serious plans to build this, I kid you not. Well, the first thing is, what about a head-on collision? You know, we could think of all sorts of stuff. But I guess what killed it, other than the expense, was they hadn't really thought about where they would dispose of nuclear waste. You know, there's just a few issues there. But that was the kind of, that was a little bit parallel to the unveiling of the iWatch, you know, Apple's watch. Now, I think that the British press, I didn't get a chance to research and read what was covered over here in The Guardian. The American press is much more monolithic, somewhat naive, and very prone towards the tabloid or the circus factor. You know, this watch has come out, and people are going to stand around line, you know, 6 months from now when it comes out, and, you know, a year from now, you may not see tablets, you know, because everybody will just, you're going to, forget carpal tunnel syndrome, you're just going to all day talk, you know, and go, oh shit, oops, we're sorry. So a lot of the coverage has been that ridiculous. No, I think it's cool. If they had a battery that ran a year, I'd get one. I think it'd be nice to have a watch that does those things. But a lot of our predictions about future technology are really rather silly. I think with the exception of this. We all know that mobiles are not going to go away. And we may not necessarily have to publish all of our documentation to mobiles, but what this has clearly done is change people's expectations as to how quickly you can receive something, how soon can you get something. Somewhat like Federal Express was introduced at the bottom of a recession in the 1980s. Nobody really had any reason to have a package in 24 hours. They just did it. And once people started to receive packages in 24 hours, all of a sudden it was like, you know, we've got to get that proposal out. And all of a sudden you had to do it within 24 hours just because you could. I mean, for years, business had gone on with 5- and 6-day cycles, you know, for mailing things. No one had a problem. People didn't go out of business. People worked 37 and a half hours a week. They had 1.5 hour lunch breaks. They took 3 weeks vacation. Well, thank God we moved beyond that. Not. Okay, so some of the things that have changed our world radically. It's hard to believe that it was only 7 years ago that the iPhone came out. I clearly remember the first one I saw, and I thought it was so amazing until I found out you couldn't make a phone call while you were doing all those things. You know, you could take pictures or whatever. And how many people remember how many of you remember people who had both an iPhone and a BlackBerry? You know, so that they could, you know, they'd be like doing this and then talking to someone. Well, that might seem silly and quaint now, but think about it. That was how much people connected with this technology. The fact that they could have a map in their hand or whatever, or look up, you know, cinema schedules, they were willing to make that kind of sacrifice to actually use 2 hands to do what we can do today with one now. One of the few slides I stole from Vikram is that as of recent statistics, it's now 1 out of every 6.7 people on the planet have a smartphone. That is going to change and expand even more because how many people here have heard of iFixit? iFixit.com? Okay, that's been on the conference circuit a lot in America. And of course what they're doing is teaching people in emerging economies how to take discarded smartphones that are 4 or 5 years old, retool them, and actually have people who are not on the electric grid, they have no electricity, with a solar panel, they're actually able to now go on the internet. And having come from the translation industry, it's having a major impact because some commercial websites for certain things are now being translated into what we called orphan African languages that no one ever thought of translating to before because there's a group out there who can order stuff on a phone. Big change, never thought that would happen. One thing that has affected us all, and I wanted to repeat this slide because I've never been able to memorize the numbers, but I think it's useful to know. This is the average time spent per interaction. Going back to television, it's pretty logical when you think about it. Most people, when they watch TV, are kind of tired. You're sitting down with a brew, you know, with your legs up or whatever, and you know, you've got whatever you want to eat and your cat in the lap, and it's about 40 minutes. Most of us don't just hop up and down on television. It's inconvenient because it involves your entire body. An interaction on the laptop, and I think this is really referring to web pages rather than your daily work, is about 39 minutes. You know, that would be about the longest somebody would go, perhaps in Kindle Reader, you know, or that type of thing. When you get down to a tablet, and you know, when you think about it, most of us have good enough eyesight that it's really not that hard to use a tablet. I find it, in my mind, it's about like a laptop. It drops to 30. And when you get down to mobile, it drops to 17 minutes for fairly obvious reasons. All of us have used smartphones, and the analogy that I like to use is if you took a tube of toilet paper and then you're going to go the entire day and view the world like that. I think he's over there. I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. It's challenging. You could do that. You know, you could probably build up enough memory that you could navigate around a shopping mall or whatever, looking through a tube, just to say it's a cylinder. I'll try not to be crude. But would you really want to do that? You know, in other words, would you want to view the world constantly through a lens that small? So I think that puts in perspective the amount of information that we can publish to mobile and maybe how much time we can expect people to be there. And also maybe how important it is for us to prioritize the information that's going to go there. I'm sure that most of you have heard of what is the 4 W's: who, what, why, where, and how. Who, what, why, where, and how. Does that ring a bell with anyone? In America, it doesn't. It's not taught anymore, sadly. If you read journalism taught by, not because they're younger, but due to the conservatives in politics who have radically cut back costs to schools because, hey, they don't matter, there are a lot of kids who've gone through school who don't know that. They have not been taught to find the most important information and put it in the first 2 paragraphs. And the reason that was done was back when we all read newspapers. When you think about it, every column on the newspaper was a little bit like a smartphone. You know, it was just a little chunk of information. And you had to capture someone's information. You had to capture someone's attention. You had to grab them within the first 2 paragraphs. I'm not an old fogey, but I do subscribe to the Oregonian in Oregon, even though I'm a Democrat, and it's owned by a Republican, and it doesn't mention anything that my Democrat Senator Merkley does. I have to know about the bridge closures and the beer festivals, et cetera. I don't know who was writing for that thing, but I've read articles where I had to get all the way down to the 18th paragraph to find out where the event was taking place, or the date of it, or even what the point of the story was. There were a lot of people in the marketplace, I think it's not as pronounced over here, who haven't been taught to do that. And the irony is that old maxim, we actually need that now more than ever before, because it's even more critical than a newspaper. So a newspaper, someone would be more prone to pick it up and eventually, tick it off with a pencil or something. So that attention span issue is very important. Of course, it's become very pronounced. This is the hour where everything is going to be adaptive content going to multiple devices. Now, if I were not Maxwell Hoffmann, private citizen, and if I were here in the Adobe slot, this is where I would launch into a FrameMaker demo, and I would show you all with one click. I could hit publish and all of a sudden make this responsive HTML layout, and you would see everything shrinking down. On my grandmother's photo, in the table will get smaller, and there's a rocket taking off in a video. Use your imagination, and you could all see and feel that. Don't you wish I'd done that? Who cares? Oxygen, X-Metal, Arbortext, FrameMaker, I don't care what you use. But anyway, that can happen. You can do that. So let's take a look at a few of the technologies that have become the next big thing. And then let's also try to use a little bit of common sense to see how much this might really affect what we have to do in terms of communicating with people. Because the big thing now is the iWatch. Okay, so there's information there. This was actually this was one of the predictions of what the iWatch was going to look like. This was about 6 months ago. I think it was Mashable or something. Now, this isn't a joke. They weren't trying to be funny. Somebody actually thought that while you were typing or while you were swiping on your tablet, that your eyes would just drift over to this other device. Oh, the weather's changing. There's a tsunami. The hotel is gone. Whatever. Here's my old ancient baby boomer common sense as to why I think that won't fly. I don't know if they have them in Britain, but how many of you have ever been in a sports bar that has a whole bunch of TVs and there's 10 different channels? Has anybody ever been through that experience? Oh, thank God, you're lucky. Can I trade places with you? A sports bar. Okay, well, believe me, I didn't go by choice. It was like I had certain types of people who said, let's go there. This is starting to fade a little bit, but in the 90s up to about 2005, there was this huge trend in America to have what was called a sports bar. And it was this real macho schmuck thing where the Hooter-like waitresses wore football jerseys, and they literally had 15 televisions on, each one on a different channel, showing some type of a sport, and ... the sound was turned on. So you had this cacophony. And how many people have ever seen an American sports show where there's the pause of commentary with 2 talking heads that are going to analyze what just happened in football? I mean, it's just mind-numbing. I could go out there and do it. You could just fake your way through it. It's like these guys just want to see 2 heads going on, oh, yeah, and it's like 32 yards, he's got this average of blah, blah. It's just this, you could just make up what they were saying, So anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is that's the type of distraction that would happen in that watch. Now, something I know that you've all experienced is Harry Potter movies, where there was a newspaper in Harry Potter that had those quaint little moving pictures. Well, that would be fun for like about 5 minutes. I mean, can you imagine trying to read or capture the information and here's this witch flying over a tower or something? I mean, it's like, how do you turn it off? My personal, I think, very, very normal, typical human reaction to that was on airplanes, when they first came out with that map that shows you where you are, which I think was, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago. Well, when that first came out, there was no way to turn it off. It was just there. They didn't have a switch. You couldn't switch it to some commercial. There was just this dreadful map. And of course, anybody who's flying from the West Coast over to Britain, what happens is you look up an hour and a half later and you're still over Greenland. It's moved like a pixel. So I'm not making this up. Yeah, I'm not ashamed to admit it. Yes, I too, Maxwell Hoffmann, am an alcoholic. I actually took chewing gum and a barf bag to cover it up because that's how distracting it was. I was just trying to sleep or read or something, and I couldn't stand the fact that we're still over Greenland. It drove me crazy. So. Yeah, exactly. I didn't see anybody glued to the screen like, wow, we're just like halfway over there. So I know that there could be vibrant, important information, and perhaps if we were living in some place that had hideous weather, it could have life-saving qualities. But from a human standpoint, there's a level of distraction that really does become intolerable. And I think also, another show of hands, how many of you, through work or whatever, how many of you find yourself on your laptop or tablet more than 8 hours a day? How many people possibly have more than 8 hours a day? Can we trade places? I don't know what you do, but I want to become you. I want your life. Well, anyway, in America, that's very pronounced. Many people, particularly in Silicon Valley, Adobe accepted, we are different. We're just not like anyone else. But many people who work in the Silicon Valley are on their work screens for up to 12 hours a day, email or whatever. Well, the last thing you really want to do when you get home is have another immersive pixel experience. All of us, this is something you have wonderful artifacts of this here in Britain. There's so much more than we have in America. But back at the turn of the 20th century, in the late 19th century, so many machine-made things were coming out, like fake antiques from machine-tooled wrought iron or bronze or whatever, that's why the whole arts and crafts movement came out. A lot of people really got sick of this industrialized stuff, and they really began to embrace technologies of the past. Now, it was a minority. It wasn't the whole population, but it was admired, and actually it was kind of, you wished you could afford it. There were all those wonderful Morris chairs and carpets, and we had a craftsman movement in America, like the Gamble House in Pasadena. This is actually starting to happen here. I recently went to a conference called Write the Docs, and you might want to write this down. It's just WRITETHEDOCS. Started in Portland, Oregon. Coincidence, I just found out about it this year. But the whole thing is run by millennials. The average age is about 22 to 23. I think it was 2 guys and 2 gals who got this idea, let's have an annual conference where just average, ordinary people that nobody's ever heard of will stand up and share what they've discovered this year and what they're doing with content, with information. So as an old fogey, I couldn't wait to go because I thought I'll find out that everybody's punching tablets and doing all this kind of stuff, and I'm like really out of it. Well, interestingly enough, half of the presentations were people who were doing very leading edge things, very cutting edge things, working for Puppet Laboratories and people like that. But they had discovered handset hot type, and they're actually making fonts. Other people are totally gotten into photography and into paper. So it's not that their whole lives are going to go there, but this is a generation that was never exposed to any of this. They've just stumbled upon it, and they're reinventing the beauty of it in a totally new and different way, which I find very exciting. The other thing that's getting a lot of hoopla, of course, and I think is maybe a little more credible, is Google Glass. I've had a chance to use it. It is very interesting. There's a lot of situations where it could become quite useful. Now, some people are projecting that this little tiny lens is where we're going to be reading our documentation. We're all going to just all of a sudden see your driver's manual. I think that this does have a serious place in our lives. I think this is going to be used mainly for information capture. And one thing, of course, would just be your daily journal. Instead of keeping notes, just snap a picture in a meeting. You can remember who was sitting there. One way it would be brilliant, I think, is just to make a quick rough draft video. Just whatever it's going to be. Maybe you're doing something on your screen, but it doesn't even matter. It's almost like what would be a rough draft. People can get a preview of what you're thinking of doing. However, this is how they're reacting to this in America. One of them is that between this, Kindle and EPUBs and whatever, we're going to have the death of libraries. And one conference organizer that I won't mention proudly crows about how excited he is that there's this college that got rid of all their books, and they have these empty shelves, and all the students are just using Kindles and EPUBs. Wonderful, they have all the knowledge that has occurred since 1992. You know, and I'm not talking about the classics. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that was written in the 70s and 80s and whatnot, and some useful things from other times as well. Do you have an equivalent to Netflix over here? I heard it's just coming here. You know, and of course we've all have Amazon Prime or some ability to download and stream movies. I would go and give anything to go back to this. You know, the days of movie palaces. If you ever go to Los Angeles, you can take a Saturday tour that will take you through 12 huge intact movie palaces. It's one of the only places in America do this. LosAngelesConservancy.org. So because of DVD and downloadable media, of course, we've all been told that cinemas are just going to go away and disappear and vanish, and of course, a lot of it's because of Netflix. The diminished experience there, which some people have discovered, is that on a backlit screen, and this includes digital projection in cinemas, you actually lose 33% of the color. So if it's a color film, you actually don't, there are objects that disappear from the room. So it is a diminished experience. Kind of the way those who have rediscovered vinyl, if you have a place to sit and listen, you actually can get a better sound than you can on an iPod. Experts have been wrong in the past, as have I. So this is where we bounce back to the 60s real quickly. These are some of the previous glimpses into the future where people have either been wrong or way off on how long something was going to take. Okay, I can still remember this. Amir Tot, one of them was... Now notice the gender roles. It's this cute housewife with a girl and a dog. And if you look up this stuff, one thing that you'll find interesting is it's constantly women doing trivial things like going to beauty shops. And there was actually a car designed in the 60s that the back, what you call it, not the boot of the bonnet. Which one is the trunk in England? Boot. The boot would actually snap off of the car and become a shopping cart. So this woman who looked kind of like... who from that era, British, because I think Doris Day, sort of a Doris Day type of the flip hairdo. She's pulling out this wonderful little metallic shopping cart, and then when she comes back, it just snaps into the car. So one thing that's kind of fun about that era is it never occurred to them that this technology could actually open up opportunities for women to move beyond men, including the 11-year-old girl in Vancouver who recently invented a coil that will go around your arm, and the heat of your body will provide energy for a flashlight for her girlfriend in the Philippines who didn't have electricity. So those days are over. You know, 50 years in the future, people will look back and they'll see an equal number of women doing these wild and wacky future things. Cars did actually get off the ground in the 60s. If you've ever seen the movie Bullet, and I'm not trying to just be coy, but that's about as far as it got. You know, I mean, I was told I was going to be flying to work by 1980. You know, and actually, when you think about it, going from 1957 with Sputnik to Man on the Moon in 1969, why not? You know, if things had really continued to go.
Where is my jetpack?
Where's what? Yeah. Oh, the jetpack. Yeah, James Bond had a jetpack. The next thing, of course, is picture telephones. Now, I know you're all going to think about Skype, but this is the World's Fair 1964. The thing about why did it not happen, the reason was because there was no infrastructure. You know, the existing phone lines would not carry that amount of data, and we had to wait until the internet became affordable in the late 90s for something like Skype to come along. So they were right, but they were off by about 35 years or so. So not that that wasn't true. What else was predicted? How computers would affect our lives. Now, this is my favorite, and I searched in vain for a magazine cover that I really wanted to get. In the 70s, around the time that Apple came out and Commodore PET or whatever, there were tons of magazine articles in America that, for you baby boomers, as you approach retirement, the #1 industry in America is going to be recreation and leisure because of the 4-day work week. Computers are going to reduce how long it takes to do everything, and we're all going to work Monday through Thursday. And they really believed this. They thought that all of us in this room would have a 3-day weekend every week of the year, and there would be all of these holiday resorts, and we would all be running. It never occurred to them that the Victorian Scrooges of the world would reemerge as corporate monsters. So this was the vision with the 4-day work week. And now, by the way, I'm not trying to be sexist. Every image has a babe in it. You know, there's always the girl with the booties or the short skirts. I couldn't find anything that wasn't insulting, so I'm not trying to do this. Just as the era. So this was one of the Winnebagos. I love this one. I just want to move in with her in the snow in this wacky Winnebago world. They really were pretty wonderful. You know, not real good on gas mileage, but who cares about that? How many people recognize this little character? He may not have been over here. This was the sock puppet from pet.com. And what this was, this was the other prediction, was clicks, not bricks. Now, I think the millennials have got their act much more together than the previous slacker generation. Not to insult anyone here, I'm only talking about Americans. But when the internet when the World Wide Web was first a little wobbly and going, in America, they firmly believed that all commerce would take place on the internet, including that you would order your dog food over the internet, would be delivered to your house, because you just couldn't be bothered to walk down there. This company was given $40 million in venture capital. And it's just totally collapsed with the dot-com boom, because there were all of these companies that didn't really have anything to offer. It was a terrific technology. Amazon works, these other things that come along, but frankly, it was just something that no one needed. The other one was where to invest your money. The one that you see on the left is Enron, who you probably have heard of. That was that energy company that they were just selling energy futures, and somebody finally figured out they really didn't have anything, and it just dropped to hell. The one on the right, which is too small to see, is the South Sea Company of 1719 to 1722. It was a British stock market crash in the early 18th century, so hey, that's happening before too. Now, what needs to change? No, I got 3 minutes. This is what we have to do to our documentation. We have a lot of our text squeezed into tables, into cautions and warnings. And this is paper-based. We're just used to that. And I think, even younger people, there's a lot of times it's like, I need to do some bullets now. Just visually, I'm going to stair step it a little, just do something to indent it over. This, of course, does not work as you go to a small screen, because it's just going to go to hell. Squeeze off the bottom. Here's an example of frame maker where somebody got carried away with, cautions and warnings. And so the problem here is too many containers. So I told you, I promised I'd end on time. I'm not kidding. So let me summarize this before I go to my closing slide. How is this technology really going to be used? I think what's going to happen is, with my Criswell psychic mind, I think that either an iWatch or possibly wearable technology like Google Glass, I think what may happen is we may have dynamic cautions and warnings. If you're working with some type of documentation that's mission critical, like airline manuals, heart attack machines, or defibrillators, or whatever, there could be something that could happen that is so critical, like perhaps a product recall, and maybe if you're out using that, there's going to be a lawsuit. So something might flash on, emergency, do not use section so-and-so on your smartphone that tells you to do this. I mean, that would be a wonderful thing. Maybe kind of like a Fitbit, sort of a vibration thing. I think eventually there will be some sort of like almost biofeedback via vibration. If you're starting to do something that's getting into a danger area, that type of information will come. Tons of information shall come through social media and from the users themselves. Going back to Colin McAndrew's earlier presentation today, I think that this is going to become much more of two-way communications, where perhaps these could be used for somebody. Maybe somebody could use Google Glass to just capture something really awful on the screen and have it go to help desk and come back. So the message is, actually, what does this mean, visual? This is a visual metaphor for something very British.
Stay calm and carry on.
Yep, keep calm and carry on. I did find one that said keep calm and carry on writing, but I think I had to slide across the screen. And what I mean by that, keep calm and carry on, is yes, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of prediction, but the reality is there are no experts. Nobody really knows exactly what wonderful purposes for all of this technology we're going to discover. And probably most of it will actually be our customers. Or like the girl who realized that her girlfriend in the Philippines didn't have electricity, and that was what drove her to come up with that. Another girl came up with a lawnmower device for women in Africa to actually roll the barrels of water rather than carry a pot on their head like they had for thousands of years. And they can now, and then for that happened to be a woman, I'm not pushing this, a 40-year-old woman in Portland, Oregon, has invented something that will attach into the barrel, so as the women are pushing the water back to their village, it is purified naturally by the time it gets there, which will eliminate the poisonous water in many parts of the world. So that's why I'm excited about this technology, is that the ideas are going to come from the ground up, and what we are going to learn to do is to filter and to distill. We'll go back to who, what, where, when, and how, or whatever, and we will determine what is critical enough to get to the top of our iPhones, and maybe the 2 sentences that need to appear within a watch, or perhaps into Google Glass. And that's my message. I think I'm on time. Am I? I can't believe I did that. I don't know if there's time for questions, but if anybody has a comment, or you're free to challenge what an idiotic premise this is, but I'm available if there is time. It's up to you. You're probably just like, oh God, is he going to leave? Get out. I know. Your heads are spinning with disbelief.
Thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely. Sure.
Remember to go on Saturday morning when you get back to your offices, your car, your train,
Yep. Great, thank you.